Greetings and welcome, colleagues. Sorry for the bit of a delay there. We were just having a bit of technical difficulties, but nonetheless, we will not be shaken nor moved. Greetings, colleagues, and welcome to our virtual film festival. It's indeed an exciting time. My name is Uyandi Sachubas, and I work for the Center for Women and Gender Studies. The film festival, of course, is hosted by the Center for Women and Gender Studies in collaboration with Yanaya and the Department of Media and Communications and the National Film and Video Foundation. It is indeed an exciting time and a very memorous moment as we wrap up the year 2020 with such an exciting collaboration, much anticipated today. But before we start, colleagues, I am of course going to just call upon none other than Professor Ola, who's going to just do the opening and welcoming for us briefly. But before that, I'll just read her bio so we know who is this person that is going to be welcoming us to this wonderful film festival that we're going to be having for the next 3 days. Professor Phumla Dineo Qola holds a Doctor of Philosophy, magna cum laude in post-colonial studies from Ludwig Maximilians University in Germany. She holds 2 Masters of Arts degree in colonial and post-colonial literature with the University of Warwick, United Kingdom, and the other was obtained in the University of Cape Town in the year 2000. Prof. Qola is a full professor in literature with specific focus on African feminism, African literature, race, class, and gender, and histories of slavery. At the end of 2020, Qola would have authored more than 6 single authored books, 5 journal special issues, and magazines. She's a towering feminist scholar with 35 accredited research outputs and book chapters, while graduating a number of postgraduate students within the African feminist studies. Prof. Qola's recent book, Rape, A South African Nightmare, is the winner of the 2016 Sunday Times Alan Paton Award and one of the most read and well-circulated books on rape today. In 2019, she was appointed to the DHET Ministerial Task Scheme to advise on matters relating to sexual harassment and gender-based violence in public universities in South Africa. She has served as the Dean of Research at University of Forte, a former HOD of African Literature Department at Wits University, between and full-time professor of African literature. Help me welcome Prof. Qola. Prof.
Thank you, Yandisa. Good morning. Is it still morning? It's afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to everybody who's joined us. Welcome to the friends of the Center for Women and Gender Studies at Nelson Mandela University. Welcome to friends of Yanaya Productions. Welcome to the friends of the Department of Media and Communication at Mandela University and the NFVF. Welcome again, and thank you for coming. We're very excited about the event that we're starting today. We're very excited about the next 3 days. As Yandisa has said, this is how we're wrapping up 2020. It is also, of course, it is the last of a series of events that we're using to also mark our first full year of existence as the Center for Women and Gender Studies at Nelson Mandela University, and a series of really exciting offerings that we have had over the past year, Corona forcing us to do everything virtually notwithstanding. We're very excited about the partnership with the units that we've talked about as well, and especially with Nayanaya Productions on the Yanaya Film Festival, which is an established film festival that showcases the work of of women filmmakers, and brings both the films themselves into wider circulation in the country and now perhaps beyond as we go virtual, as well as, of course, inviting us to think critically about the films we'll be seeing and about filmmaking. As a feminist center, the Center for Women and Gender Studies is dedicated to studying, amplifying, understanding various kinds of work by women in our contemporary moment, as well as historically, the work of activist women, the intellectual and creative, imaginative productions by women. We're excited over the next 3 days to have a very rich program over the next 3 days. And of course, you can still register for individual days, and you can still feel free to share the program with further networks. We look forward over the next 3 days to being stretched emotionally, intellectually, and aesthetically. We are unapologetic as the Center for Women and Gender Studies about our recognition that creative genres, films, literature, fine arts, photography, are not just illustrative, but dynamic and deliberately generative of ideas, of knowledge, of ways of being, of ways of feeling about ourselves and our societies and in our own skins, of possibilities. We take works of the imagination very seriously, and we delight in their consumption at the same time. We also understand that aesthetics are crucial, life-sustaining registers and realms. Therefore, as we watch these films over the next 3 days by brilliant, talented women filmmakers, listen to incredible master classes, and as our daring, incisive panelists and you, our audience and participants, we hope that we begin to open new realms of possibilities. We couldn't have this event, of course, without these wonderful people on the lineup and your participation as our audience. So welcome again, enjoy the film festival and enjoy what we have on offer as a way of wrapping up 2020. And again, as part of our celebration of being in existence for a year as a Center for Women and Gender Studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof, for such a warm welcome. I do think that I speak for everyone that is watching, that we do feel welcome and we are as excited as you are about the next 3 days. Colleagues, without wasting any more time, I'm then going to call a energetic and lovely woman, Ms. Xoliso Sithole, who I'm just going to briefly read her bio before she comes on so we understand and know who is this wonderful woman who's going to be giving us the background of this film festival and why it was deemed necessary and important that we have it here today. So Ms. Xoliso Sithole is a producer and a director who makes films mainly about women and children, focusing on justice, human rights, and poverty. She started out her film career as an actress in the anti-apartheid films like Cry, Freedom, and Mandela, and then moved into production as a receptionist for the BBC, Cecil John Rhodes, and as a PA to Val Kilmer on Ghost in the Darkness. Xoliso then moved on to become a researcher for companies like CNN and BBC in South Africa. In 2001, she produced a documentary called Shouting Silent, shown on Showtime in America, which explored the vulnerabilities of young girls who had lost their mothers to HIV/AIDS, having lost her own mother to HIV/AIDS herself. In 2005, she worked with the True Vision TV from the UK as the South African producer on Orphans of Inkandla, which then won her a BAFTA and an International Emmy nomination. Xoliso Sithole has worked on the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy as a South African producer, and Xoliso Sithole directed and produced a ribbon in the Sky documentary about the effects of poverty on women with disabilities. Ms. Sithole produced a documentary on Nelson Mandela called Project Mandela, released in April 2010. The list is endless, colleagues, and one of her passions, Uxolisa runs a film festival focusing on 16 days of activism and violence against women and children in South Africa. She's a member of BAFTA, a founding member of Filmmakers Against Racism, and sits on the Manyika Committee at Harvard with people like Henry Louis Gates Jr., Senator Cory Booker, and so forth. Colleagues and everyone who has tuned in, help me welcome and just really and truly, we thank you, Sis Xolisa, for being a part of today's program.
Oh God, I don't know where to start. Basically, you know, as a filmmaker, many people have always said to me, where do we see your films? And I then realized that that in itself was a problem. So I started with, you know, trying to raise money for, you know, to do a film festival that was going to look at 16 days of activism and violence. And the first 2 years I worked with United Nations and Ministry of Arts and Culture. But then a couple of years later, that was about maybe 8 years ago, I started the Yanaya Gender and Dialogue Festival, whereby I was wanting to showcase films by women looking at issues that were affecting women, women and culture, women and race, women and gender, LGBTIQ issues. And I was taking the festival to rural areas. But then I felt that I wasn't making enough of a footprint. And I could not have been the luckiest person on earth, because this is a passion project. And when I approached the gender studies of the Nelson Mandela University, and I requested through Prof. Kola, through Babalwa, to say, look, this is really, really something that should be in the domain of such an institution, such a department, because we need to unpack, you know, gender issues from so many different angles. And I don't have the resources, for instance, to now put this film festival on YouTube and this kind of platform. And of course, as we get out of COVID, I'm hoping that this is going to be a standing relationship where we grow the festival, we do so many interesting things where we need to engage our society around issues of gender.
And production company in New Brighton Pictures. And before we call upon this wonderful woman, we're just going to do a brief synopsis on what her masterclass is going to be on. The summary of the name of the masterclass is Post-Colonial Feminist Filmmaking in Practice, which will be conducted by Prof. Shubeshni. The summary of the masterclass is Shubeshni discusses the filmmaking model that she designed as one of the outputs of her PhD research. The purpose of the PhD was to develop a method for articulating the narratives of South African Hindu women as a focus sample through the medium of film. Based on the principles of post-colonial theory and feminism, her study argued that participatory video, a form of self-reflective filmmaking, offered a twofold function as both methodological tool for the gathering of the stories of women and a storytelling device of the voicing of their narratives, a process she refers to as post-colonial feminist film practice. The success of this research has led to subsequent creative outputs in the form of postgraduate student research, all of which emphasize social development and community engagement. The masterclass will elaborate specifically on the technical and conceptual approaches that inform the post-colonial feminist film practice. Colleagues, help me welcome Prof. Shubeshni as she delivers the masterclass for us today. Hi, Prof. Prof, please just unmute your mic for us.
not the best start. Hi, everyone. I'm so
Hi, Bro.
excited to be here and to have you listen to my research. I'm just going to share my screen first. Okay, can I tell you a story? Imagine a little girl who, until the age of 5.5, witnessed more often than not her drunken father physically, mentally, and emotionally abuse her mother. Imagine that little girl trying to defend and protect her mother unsuccessfully during those abusive episodes. Imagine the fear experienced by that little girl as she stole away into the middle of the night with her mother, her little sister, and the clothes on their back when her mother decided enough was enough and mustered the courage to escape. Then imagine that little girl entering a community where stories of women whose experiences similar to those of her mother were shared. Stories of a great-grandmother married off in her teens to an older man having an affair with his sister-in-law. Stories of the same great-grandmother standing up for herself, refusing to consummate the marriage and being dumped in the middle of a marketplace by her in-laws because she dared to expose the truth. Stories of the same great-grandmother being rejected by her family for being too feisty and bringing shame on the family. And yet more stories of the same great-grandmother being traded by her own father over a drink at a bar to a man he barely knew because he could no longer control her. And then imagine that same great-grandmother, years later, experience the suicide of her only daughter who dared to fall in love and be severely judged for it. These are just two of the very many stories that the little girl grew up with. Now imagine that little girl as an adult, with all of these stories of the generations of strong women in her family, playing like a visual diary over and over in her head, and feeling a burgeoning desire to give them a voice. Women, history, community, conversation, and storytelling are the factors that have inspired what I today refer to as a postcolonial feminist film practice. My journey to this approach began as two parallel paths that I found myself straddling: academia and filmmaking. Eventually, through research and experimentation, the two paths converged. The masterclass that follows shares with you parts of my journey to developing this approach and the process that the approach entails. Please note that my approach is one of many that exist and that are still to be developed. My approach emerges out of a very specific research trajectory and theoretical specialization. What I have tried to ensure, though, is the refinement of my approach is an openness to contextual specificity and further innovation. In other words, the post-colonial feminist film practice that I propose needs to be seen as a work in constant progress, or in film terms, an open-ended narrative or a story to be continued. In my presentation today, I would like to focus more on the process of the practice as opposed to its theoretical background, because you will note by the end of my presentation that even though my participants left the study having learned a skill and with a film to show for it, they benefited most from the dialogue and self-reflexivity of the process. So if it seems that the theoretical and methodological background that I offer for the study is a little brief, please feel free to ask me to clarify or elaborate during the Q&A session. So, what is a post-colonial feminist film practice? It is a multifaceted approach to filmmaking that attempts to establish a creative, expressive, and resistant space for the sharing of the stories of marginal groups and communities. What began as a study focused on films for, by, and about women has developed into a filmmaking approach that is more broadly applicable in a variety of contexts and across a variety of disciplines. It is also an approach that takes theoretical proposals for development and empowerment at the level of the academy and applies them to contexts where these initiatives are most needed. But it is not a one-sided application that sees the academy thrusting models of development onto certain groups of people. Rather, a post-colonial feminist film practice works as a dialectical process that begins with a theoretical proposal but that necessarily requires the engagement and involvement of the community or group in order for the proposal to be applied. Practice is therefore only possible through mutual teaching, mutual learning, and an understanding of contextual factors and a consciousness of systems of meaning making, ways of seeing, and ways of being. When I began my research journey at a master's level, I attempted to develop a framework for reading films by female filmmakers of the Indian diaspora to understand the construction of their female protagonists. Postcolonial theory provided the most appropriate theoretical base from which to start. As such, I developed a very neat little framework of analysis which worked beautifully for reading the films, but failed miserably when I tried to apply the framework to actually making a film as a pilot study for my PhD. Besides limiting the creative potential for resistance through filmmaking with a highly structured framework, the approach tended to essentialize the experiences of the group of women I wanted to reach and represent. In effect, I had discovered flaws or gaps in the theory that I had proposed. I realized that while there were aspects of postcolonial theory that were useful to developing my approach to a feminist filmmaking practice, there were also aspects that I needed to question and rethink, specifically the body of work pertaining to the positionality of the postcolonial scholar and the production of and engagement with postcolonial texts. So then, what underpins a postcolonial feminist film practice? Firstly, a distinct move away from an emphasis on textualism. That is, rejecting the endless theorizing about the problems of marginal groups and idealizing of potential strategies of resistance and empowerment in favor of more tangible efforts at a grassroots level, and infusing in proposals for resistive action with practical experiences and knowledge of the communities for which these proposals have been designed. Secondly, redefining the place of the scholar. That is, destabilizing the place of the scholar within the academy such that the scholar is compelled to engage more deeply with communities about whom they theorize. An engagement that is characterized by a subjective scholar who teaches, learns, sees, and feels with the community with whom they interact, as opposed to an objective, distanced scholar. A scholar who is keenly aware of their position both within the academy and the community, and who is able to critically reflect on this position. Thirdly, the scholar as activist. Upon revisiting these issues surrounding textualism and the place of the scholar, my work toward developing a post-colonial feminist film practice organically led me to what I refer to as the scholar as activist. I argue that the concept of the scholar as activist promotes the notion of the socially embedded intellectual who is prepared to leave the safety net of the academy in order to engage in affective interactions and mutual learning with the participants or communities that they purport to research. This scholar as activist, I maintain, does not just write about their findings through such engagements, but rather actively pursues the co-creation of knowledge with these participants or communities in an effort to affirm the contextual specificity of their existence and the value of their knowledge systems in a larger social structure. Within this context, autoethnography, visual anthropology, and participatory video were selected as key methodological strands informing the process of the post-colonial feminist film practice. Autoethnography proved appropriate to my study because it generally culminates in a first-person narrative that can assume one or more of a wide range of forms: short stories, poetry, fiction, novels, etc. In my project, this of course included film and video text as well. As described by Carolyn Ellis, autoethnographic research is writing about the personal and its relationship to culture. It is an autobiographical genre of writing and research that displays multiple layers of consciousness. The primary purpose of the personal narrative is to understand a self or some aspect of a life lived in a cultural context. In personal narrative texts, authors become I, readers become you, participants become us. Participants are encouraged to engage in a critical conversation with authors or researchers, to think of themselves as co-researchers, to share authority, and to author their own lives in their own voices. Participatory video. In a similar vein, participatory video generally points to the shared production of visual material or footage in which the director or filmmaker or researcher is not solely responsible for the final product. Participatory video is a special kind of storytelling that ideally involves the community in telling a story, listening to the story, interpreting the story through its own lens, and being empowered to retell and change it to create a community or a political reality that matches one's own desired condition. Individuals or communities forming the central focus of the video may be involved in its production either through on-camera interviews, direct address to the camera, giving permission to be filmed in their own environment, taking the camera into their own hands and shooting footage, or participating in and or advising on the editing of the visual material as well. Of relevance to my project is that participatory video is a consciousness-raising methodological tool that creates an awareness of social issues inherent in the lives of its participants and an opportunity for critical reflection on forms of social action that could possibly improve social well-being. Visual anthropology. In this regard, Sarah Pink's work in applied visual anthropology strongly emphasizes the potential of the visual to engage in social intervention initiatives. As social intervention, applied visual anthropology usually takes the form of a problem-solving practice that involves collaborating with research participants and aims to bring about some form of change. She argues that development agencies view audiovisual material as a means to producing and disseminating knowledge that is inaccessible through written and verbal media, and illustrates that community-based participatory video projects work to constitute identities, empower marginalized people. For these reasons, participatory video has been viewed as an effective method for foregrounding and or achieving feminist imperatives. This potential emerges out of the following trends in participatory video practice. The power of the visual image to foster positive changes in attitude and social behavior, such that people become agents of their own destinies and identities. The possibilities of empowerment with women behind the camera, the documenting and sharing of realities, stories, and experiences, the reclaiming or celebration of culture and heritage, the exposure of social injustice and the challenging of public stereotypes, a potential voice to the voiceless, and the production of social texts with and by the people, drawing on knowledge of local conditions, beliefs, cultures, and customs, provided that a level of political will exists among the people. So, how then did the research process play out in my study? For my PhD study, I realized that in order to avoid the assumptions on which my pilot film was based, I couldn't presume to speak on behalf of South African Hindu women. I needed to hear their voices. I needed them to tell their own stories, and I needed to see them the way they saw themselves. There was no better way to do this than to put the camera into their hands. The first stage of my participant research drew on interactive interviewing, an autoethnographic tool. This involved both myself as researcher and the participants in a workshop setting, sharing experiences of being Hindu in a South African context, exchanging stories of the role and impact of Hinduism in our lives as women, and how this has been represented through dominant modes of film. The second stage of the process involved introductory film and video equipment literacy lessons in order for the participants to have a basic knowledge of how to make a film and use a camera. The actual workshops were covered over 3 weekends, 6 days in total, but the post-workshop interactions and consultations with the participants regarding the knowledge that they gained and the films that they were producing spanned just over 1 year. The equipment that they each received was a high-end consumer digital video camera, a tripod, and a microphone. Their workshop lessons included understanding film genre and documentary styles, as well as training in basic skills such as script writing for mainstream narrative film, capturing footage, and editing. The participants were then shown sample videos of short narrative films and examples of various types of documentary. This preliminary session ended with brainstorming not only the stories we wanted to tell through our individual films, but also the various ways in which we could use film and video to tell these stories. This marked the beginning of the participatory video approach in the project. The participants, including myself, were then expected to record our stories over a specified period of time. The next stage, once we had recorded our footage, involved engaging in discussions held over the course of several months, either in person or via email, to collaborate on and workshop a full-length film that would incorporate all of our stories. This involved viewing all our footage, finding the common threads, if any, that emerged from our stories, and deciding on whether the final film should be assembled as an anthology of films or whether it should intercut various parts of the footage gathered by each of us, or whether an entirely new story should be told that incorporates the various issues highlighted by the footage we had recorded. In this way, the participants and I attempted to engage the third phase of the autoethnographic research process by co-constructing a narrative for the final film. By the end of the series of workshops, however, it was decided that since our stories and ideas about how to put our films together were so varied, we each needed to complete a separate film that could then be compiled as an anthology of narratives or perhaps exhibited as a film or video installation. Eventually, it was decided that given the diversity of our experiences and creative vision, it would be best for each of us to make our own films. The results of the process were more than I could have ever imagined. I would now like to take you through some of the outcomes of my project by discussing the work and feedback of some of my participants. Manjini Mestri's section in my thesis was titled "The Feminist Filmmaker Within," because this is what she claimed that my project had released for her. She decided to make a documentary about the significance of the sari to a Hindu woman's existence. She began with the idea that the sari was actually a symbol of oppression, as this is how she had experienced it. Her idea for her film was to gather together women in her community to discuss their relationship with the sari. She felt that her story was so embedded in that of her community that she could not tell hers without telling theirs. She asked them to bring along saris of particular significance for them. So, coming of age saris, wedding saris, etc. To her surprise, women queued outside the temple where she hosted the interviews. And they didn't just bring saris. They arrived dressed in their most beautiful saris, complete with jewelry and head adornments. They all wanted a platform to speak, and they felt that the camera offered that. Through her interviews, she learned that the sari meant so much more to them than just a symbol of oppression. Many of them felt pride for what they had achieved with their saris. For example, one woman fought against all odds to become the first Indian female driving instructor in the 1970s, all while wearing her sari. She saw it as a symbol of strength. Another woman, who despite her troubled, abusive marriage, dressed brides for a living and saw the sari as a symbol of hope. To her, the process of putting on a sari reminded her of a time when she was happy and gave her hope that she would be happy again. Manjini's participants thanked her for the opportunity to share their stories. By engaging the participatory and self-reflexive approach to filmmaking that she had learned from our workshops, Manjini had not only created a space for women to speak, be seen, and be heard, she had also learned about her own prejudices as an Indian woman. And the original orientation of her film changed. While the sari may be a symbol of oppression in many instances, her participants chose to see and use the sari as a form of silent resistance in a society that didn't always support them. Mrs. Yoganbal Singaram was the oldest member of my group of participants. She had lost her husband to cancer not long before my project workshops began. Even though she was a bubbly, energetic woman for her age, she spent much of her time sadly reflecting upon her husband and his accolades. There were even moments during the workshops where she broke down because she missed him so much. I worried about this because my project was supposed to be about her, telling her story. She was definitely an interesting case. She had had a wonderful marriage. Both she and her husband were well-known performers in the Indian community. He was a mridangam player and she was a Bharatanatyam dancer and teacher. Even though they were both equally talented and had studied and performed overseas, he somehow enjoyed more fame within the South African Indian community. There was a lot more done to celebrate and commemorate his life work. She, however, didn't seem to pick this up, even though the rest of us in the workshop did. It took her a long time to decide what her film would be about, and she seemed to be veering toward a film about her husband. Then, one day, out of the blue, after we'd completed all of our workshops, she called me up and said, "Subeshni, I think I want this to be my film. I love my husband, and he was a wonderful man who treated me with respect. But I think that his story has been told enough. I have no record of my life as a dancer. I want to tell the story of my life. Is that okay?" Of course it was okay. And so I titled her section of my PhD, "This is My Story, Claiming a Space of Representation." She chose to structure her documentary around the dance classes that she teaches on a weekly basis. She didn't feel very confident with the camera equipment. So she asked if I could direct, she asked if she could direct my postgraduate research assistant and I to capture and edit the footage for her in the way that she envisioned. Given the participatory nature of the process, this was entirely possible. I was pleasantly surprised at how much she had learned and how well she had executed it all. In my final interview with the participants after the films had been made, she told me that she appreciated the uniqueness of the research process and had never before found a space where she felt so supported to tell her story. Before I move on to discussing how aspects of the postcolonial feminist framework has been applied in the research film work of one of my postgraduate students, I would like to discuss one more research participant in my study. Jessica Gounden was not a participant that fitted in easily at first. At the time, she had been divorced for a few years and she was bringing up her 3 sons on her own. The one thing that stood out most about Jessica across all of the workshops is that she repeated her story over and over again, no matter what we were discussing at any given time. But then something changed. At our last workshop, when we all sat together viewing our unedited footage and giving each other ideas about how to put our films together, we noticed a distinct change in Jessica's mood and physical demeanor. We were reviewing her footage, and there was a particular moment in the footage where she'd asked her oldest son to record her. She was sitting on a couch with her 2 younger sons, paging through an old album. The boys were amused by the old pictures, clothing, and hairstyles. And then they turned to an old wedding photo of Jessica and their dad. There was complete silence as Jessica and her sons were suddenly forced to remember another time in their lives. At this point in the workshop, Jessica put her footage on pause. She then turned to me and the rest of the participants and said, "I don't need to talk about this anymore." So I asked her what she meant. She said that she realized while watching the footage that her life is so consumed by her experiences with her husband that she wasted so much time speaking about it repeatedly because she felt that she was never heard. Now that she had seen herself on screen, speaking about her experiences during her marriage, she felt affirmed. Her story had been recorded, and she felt that she had been seen and heard. At the final interview, she said that the entire research process had felt very therapeutic. She felt that in those few months, she'd healed more than she had in the years after her divorce. She asked me to title her section of my PhD, Film as Therapy, and she also made me promise that I would take my postcolonial feminist film practice further to help women who have suffered trauma. This year, finally, I have managed to keep part of my promise by compiling a project proposal for funding for this very purpose. I would like to conclude with a discussion of how one of my former MA students, Mzwandile Makanya, at UKZN, drew on the participatory and self-reflexive aspects of the post-colonial feminist film practice to produce a very successful documentary film that was used for social development and awareness purposes by the Tandonani Children's Foundation. Upon completing his honors degree, Mzwa was approached by the Department of Agriculture at UKZN about his final honors film based on food insecurity among students on campus. They invited him to complete a combined master's with the Department of Media and Cultural Studies that looked at a very specific food security issue in household subsistence farming. They wanted him to make a documentary about the indigenous farming methods of female subsistence farmers in Willowfontein, KZN. They hoped that the film could be used as a teaching tool to look at ways of combining indigenous farming methods with more scientific farming methods. However, when Mzwa met the female subsistence farmers, he discovered that there were more pressing issues that needed to be dealt with. By engaging a participatory approach, Mzwa discovered that these women were struggling to grow sustainable crops. Besides a rat infestation due to improperly disposed nappies as a result of poor sanitation processes provided by the municipality, the women's crops were destroyed by their husbands' cattle. When they addressed the sanitation issue with the municipality and the university, they were told that they were shifting blame and behaving entitled. When they addressed the issue of cattle with their husbands, they were beaten. Mzwa decided that he needed to get all parties to discuss and address the issues through a film dialogue. He invited the various stakeholders to several discussions at the home of the female subsistence farmers. He then asked the various stakeholders to watch the footage of these interactions at various stages and to advise him on the arrangement of the footage. What's interesting as we get to the end of the film is the change in attitudes of all parties involved after they've had a chance to reflect on their previous engagements with each other. We suddenly see the municipal workers and academic researchers being more empathetic and more open to working with the women to resolve the issues instead of just assigning blame. And the women themselves acknowledge that they do appear entitled when they watch themselves on the video, and argue that they will also try to be more proactive in dealing with issues within their control and in how they approach the other stakeholders. Mzwa had no expectations of what would emerge from the process, but what he did find is that the conversation throughout the process and the ability to reflect on the process via a participatory video mode led to change, even if in a small way. I know I didn't speak to the other stills, but I just want you to look at this particular still, which comes towards the beginning, towards the middle of his film. And it's actually a discussion between the university staff and municipal workers and the Willowfontein women, subsistence farmers on your right, on the right of the screen. And it's interesting to note the division, how the camera captures so beautifully that division between the two in the middle of the film. Okay. I have reached the end of my presentation, and I hope that this very pre-seed version of my work provides enough insight for you to want to explore the post-colonial feminist film practice a little further. There is still lots of work to be done out there in the world, and I hope that what I'm currently doing makes an impact in some way. I would like to urge you to watch the films The Rules and Fortunate by two of my students, Olwetu Manzi and Noma Ndaka, respectively, and attend the related discussions. Both young women have drawn on self-reflexivity in the making of their personal narrative documentaries to highlight issues of gender-based violence and abandonment. I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Prof. I really, I think I speak on behalf of everyone that's listening. That was extremely detailed and thorough. And I think you challenged us to really think about the post-colonial feminist filmmaking in practice. And I think I particularly enjoyed the accounts of the people that you sort of interviewed and engaged with. I think it really puts it into praxis for us and really helps us to really think, more in detail about this about the post-colonial filmmaking theory. So I do see a comment. So what colleagues, what we will do, please feel free to sort of populate the chat section with just engagement as we continue to chat with Prof. Moodley about some of the narratives in which she has brought forward for us today. I see a comment from Uspesihle. Yes, I think it's a comment. It's not really a question. She says, Prof. Moodley, this is amazing and so touching. I've been drawn in since you started speaking. Is it any way possible? Oh, there is a question. Is it any way possible? Sorry, I'm just needing to fix. Sorry, apologies.
I think she's asking if it would be possible to view some of these films.
Yes. Oh, is it any way possible for anyone to view these individual films from your research? I'm intrigued and filled with feelings of both empathy and sympathy and curiosity about these women's stories. These are such important narratives. And then there's something here from Cisco Elise. She says, you are special as a filmmaker. This was very deep and helped us to think out of the box. What is the project you want to do that you are raising money for? Would you say that you are an anthropologist filmmaker? So those are the two questions on the floor.
Okay, I'll start with Sipasishle. Yes, Sipasishle, I will find a way to make those films available. I just need to go back to my participants to ask if they're happy for these films to be shared. A lot of them were very, let's just say they were not confident about showing their stuff because, there were technical issues and it was their first time making the film. So they felt that their films weren't as polished as they would have liked them to be. But I do know that they wanted the message to go out. So what I can do is try to get them loaded on the university YouTube sort of platform, and then maybe the Center for Women and Gender Studies can share that link with all the attendees and participants here today. Okay, Sis Tloliswa. I don't know how I would describe myself. Over time, I've been called academic filmmaker, an anthropologist filmmaker, but I think I think the title that makes me happiest is feminist filmmaker. So, but yes, I mean, obviously my approach definitely has a very strong anthropological basis, sort of embedding yourself in the community, listening to stories, learning with the people, and also learning to see how they see things, and sharing your knowledge with them, teaching them. So yes, definitely. But yeah, in terms of labels, I also find, even to name this practice of mine was difficult for me because labeling obviously limits it kind of speaks you into a subject position. So I'm hoping that we can move past the labels and actually just see it as a kind of more open approach to doing things, making films, engaging in social development, engaging in empowerment. The project that I'm raising money, well, I'm trying to raise money for, I've actually written an NRF Tutuka research proposal for this project called Filmmaking as Therapy. And it basically uses the same post-colonial feminist film practice approach, but it's working specifically, or I intend to work specifically with women who've suffered trauma and who are currently undergoing professional therapy. So what we envisage is that the post-colonial feminist film practice is a form of therapy that works alongside their professional therapy. So almost like a creative outlet for whatever they're going through, or creative outlet for their healing process. I think I've answered those two questions. Are there any more?
Yes, there's a few. We have a hand up from Barbara Kritzinger. I don't know if she wants to unmute herself so that she can verbally ask the question, or should I just, because I see she has written it down as well.
It appears to be a comment, not a question.
Okay, but her hand was up. Right, Barbara, do you want to ask or comment? All right. Okay. Let's sort of, yeah, let's read the other ones that came before. All right. There is one from that says, Prof, thank you so much for sharing this vital work. I can only imagine how powerful your model can be in the telling of women's stories and giving a voice to those who are underrepresented. That's a comment for you, Prof. And there's another one from Asipe that says, thank you for the presentation, Prof. The post-colonial film theory hasn't been explicitly foregrounded, and your presentation was everything. I'm interested in understanding the intersection between post-colonial theory and film studies, particularly with the role of representation in the two. Did you hear that, Prof?
Where's that?
It's in the chat section. Should I read it again?
The intersection between post-colonial theory and film studies. Well, the aspect of post-colonial theory that I drew on was specifically the issue around textualism. There's quite a deep criticism of post-colonial theory by post-colonial theorists themselves, where they speak about the fact that there's this heavy focus on producing texts and sort of it's this perpetual theorizing, and there's these texts that just sit, and these texts are produced by the theorists themselves, who actually have no engagement with the communities about whom they write and discuss. So I thought, well, film is a text, and what if I took that text to the communities? What if I decided that we can draw on all the other aspects of post-colonial theory that speak to giving a voice to the voiceless, representing marginal groups, etc., but using film as the platform to do that. So that's where the two intersected for me. I wanted to address the issue of textualism and show that the text is not just for those who sit in the academy. It's not just for them to produce. It's actually for them to produce those texts in consultation with the people about whom they write.
All right.
I hope that's the question.
Yeah. There's one from Spoka Azitao that says, as a feminist filmmaker, how do you deal with the misinterpretations and misconceptions of feminism and feminist narratives in the filmmaking process. And did you capture that, Prof?
Well, to be quite honest, I actually don't focus on that, because my feeling is that if you get the people to represent themselves, that is a feminist standpoint in itself. The fact that they get to speak their stories and they get to tell their stories and they get to give voice to their stories is a feminist standpoint. And it doesn't matter what people misinterpret or misunderstand. It's about what the process of being able to represent yourself does for you. And that is the feminist action. And that is the feminist message. And then, there will be people who will misinterpret it. There will be people who will misunderstand what that means. But there's also going to be people to whom your story speaks, to whom your story relates. So that's how I approach it.
All right. There's one I missed, I think, from Prof. Kola that says, thank you, Shubeshni, for number one, the reminder that the camera can present the possibility of subjects, here, the woman, not just feeling seen, but also being able to speak, And then, oh, sorry, I lost it there. Sorry, I'm just trying.
Yes, I agree with her.
Yes. Oh, yes. And then she says number two, loving the woman, Manjini's group, insisting on their own symbolic meanings of the sari and of their own saris. So often we want to pretend that when women work only with inherited or received or obvious meanings of body styling. Yes.
Yes, I completely agree with those 2 points. And what was so touching about that particular project? She said they queued. These women just queued outside, wearing their own beautiful saris, and they were at one point actually fighting to get in because they thought they weren't going to get a chance to show themselves and to speak. And what she eventually did, if you saw in those 2 little stills that I put in, she actually created a little bridal altar for them to sit. It's almost like this holy space for them to sit in and to share what they needed. So it was actually for her a very beautiful process.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's just commentary from, again, Barbara, that says, hi, Shubeshni, I just have enjoyed this so much. I'm so amazed by how seeing oneself speaking and having experiences recorded had such an impact on people. I want to do this with people. My favorite Zoom this year.
Thank you. That's very fun.
And then we have one from Utsidi that says, many thanks, Prof. I was really touched by your presentation. I think sharing your films in the broad media will help so many women to open up, because abuse of women is cross-cultural, but in our country, you mostly see Black women speaking out. I think, I keep losing these things, these questions. Yes, she says, I think to be taken seriously as women in this country, voices must come from across the board. Your work can give women the voice that they don't have.
Thank you. I'll definitely, that's my goal, my plan, to eventually get to that point where I'm doing several different projects using this approach. And the nice thing about the approach is that we can adapt it to each different project as we see fit, or whatever the project actually calls for. So yes, thank you.
All right. Prof, thank you so much for just that very insightful presentation. Just from your side, is there any closing commentary that you want to have? And then after that, we'll just go through a 5-minute break before we go into the next discussion for today. Just closing commentary, and then that will be the close of such a wonderful masterclass that you have given us today.
Thank you. I just wanted to, thank the Center for Women and Gender Study and Siskoliswa from Nayanaya Productions and the NFVF for this kind of platform. For a while, I've been wanting a feminist film festival to happen. And I know that people from my school in the Faculty of Humanities, Language, Media, and Communication have been nagging me to get it going. And it's a difficult thing to do on your own. So I think if we can continue to host these kinds of events and perhaps make our festival a yearly one, that would be great. It's a wonderful platform to hear other people's research, other people's initiatives, to get new ideas. So I'm very grateful that I was able to share my research, to share the voices of my research participants and those of my students. And I just want to remind you to please watch the other 2 student films as well. They're very powerful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Do enjoy the rest of the film festival, and we enjoyed every minute of your presentation. Thank you so much. Colleagues, this is how we're now going to proceed. We're going to have a bit of a break until we enter our next session. Our next session will then be moderated by Uspokazi Tao, so you won't be seeing my face until the last session. We're going to take about a 5-minute break. Yes, we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back, and then Uspokazi is going to conduct the next session on the student films and just have a bit of a conversation with, of course, Oluetu. And yeah, so colleagues, do take time just to freshen up, go get like some coffee or whatever it is that you need, and then we will begin with our next session. So thank you so much.
movie, The Rules by Uolwethu Manzi. I just want to check and verify that Olwetu is here just before I start. I see Olwetu is here. Okay. All right. So I think we're all set to start. I think to start, I'll just read a portion of Olwetu's bio. Olwetu is a young female born and bred in a small town called Mthatha in the Eastern Cape. She graduated with a BA Media Communication and Culture degree from the Nelson Mandela University. She's currently studying towards a BA Honours degree in Media Studies, also at the Nelson Mandela University. In 2019, she was an intern at a production company in Port Elizabeth called the Media Workshop, where she was part of 15 graduates who were mentored by the world-renowned director David Lister. Under David Lister's mentorship, Olwetu directed a short film titled Explosives Lives, which premiered at the Lavuti Bai Film Festival, which took place at the New Metro Cinema here in Port Elizabeth. In her honors film, which we will be discussing just now, Olwetu has used her skills as a filmmaker to bring awareness to the fear, anxiety, and depression that most women in South Africa experience daily due to the high rate of GBV in the country. Okay, I'm just going to further just read the synopsis of the movie, The Rules. In The Rules, Olwetu draws on a self-reflective documentary approach. Here, the filmmaker uses her experience with gender-based violence to poignantly highlight the fears and anxieties that most women experience in South Africa. Before we get into the discussion, perhaps I should allow Olwetu just a few minutes for her to reflect and talk a little bit about some of the key themes in her film. Olwetu?
Okay, thank you, Tao. I would like to thank everyone for coming, and I would like to thank everyone for the opportunity to present my film. I would just like to give a brief background to the film and why I thought it would be a good idea to actually tackle the issue of gender-based violence. I never really thought of GBV as a pandemic until COVID-19 came along. I saw how everyone took it upon themselves to fight the spread of the virus and the rules and regulations that came with the pandemic. And then that was when I realized that I have been living with the rules for some time. And then I started asking myself, was I living in a pandemic? Why did I make up those rules? And then it was then that I started having this idea to create a film about GBV, but to take a self-reflective approach, meaning that I would be exposing myself to the world. And I was hoping that by telling my story, a lot of women would see themselves reflected in mine. It was a comforting moment when I did research for the film and found that I'm not alone. Many women in South Africa have their own rules to avoid GBV. And it is not only gender-based violence survivors, but many women. The inspiration behind my film is that with this film, when I was filming it, I hoped that by telling my story, many women will see their stories reflected in mine, and they will know that they are not alone, they are not being dramatic, and they are not overly emotional about GBV. And then what I hoped the film would do, and I still do hope that it will continue, I hope the film will open up dialogues about GBV, and that in those dialogues, we will be able to include men. I honestly feel the ball is in their court now. I mean, we've done everything. We've marched, we've worn lipsticks, and we've shouted and created hashtags, but still, once in a while, or even more than once in a while, the COVID-19, the gender-based violence wave hits us. By opening up dialogues, I believe we are creating a space where men can be able to hear our plea and not justify or explain away GBV by creating their own hashtags, which in a way are opposite to our own hashtags, such as not all men, but to lead at the front, to understand that coexisting with them is tough for some women, and to be understanding of that, and to not call us being over dramatic or thinking that we are special in a way. For them to confront rape culture in their own spaces and to correct each other. I hope that this film will educate men that we live in fear and that we're not being overly dramatic. And I call this project a schoolwork project that got too personal. I remember when I approached Prof. Moodley and I told her what I wanted to do for my honors film. I told her a lot of ideas, but I never told her about this story because it was too personal. And in a way, taking a self-reflective approach means that you are opening yourself up to a lot of criticism. You're opening up yourself to a lot of negativity, but there is positivity as well. And I hope that through my story, a lot of women will know that they are not alone. And I've seen a lot of women who have created their own rules, and I've taken some of their own rules now and added into mine. Thank you for this opportunity, Tao. Back to you.
Thank you, Oluetu, and thank you as well just for allowing us to see, the thinking process that was going through the creation of your art. I want to ask, because your film is quite self-reflective and you do touch on that, there's a particular sense of awareness and consciousness that, that is involved in that. And it is a personal story. You highlight that for us. I want to ask, perhaps from the onset, if the creating of the film has been healing in some way for you. Has that process led to some form of healing?
It has led to some form of healing because I had to sometimes go back to that day and reflect a lot and think about that day a lot, which is something that I don't do. And I don't even talk about that day a lot in my life. But because I was doing this film, I had to go there. I had to go to a space where I avoid by all means to go there. And that was a healing experience for me because I spoke about it and it led to me realizing that I'm not alone. I think the most important thing that I realized throughout this whole thing is that I'm not alone. And it was seeing the support that I got from people who are like, yo, bro, we also do have our own rules. Do you want us to borrow each other's rules and just live, try to survive this pandemic? So it was kind of nice in a way, yeah. So I did heal.
Yeah. I think you're right when especially for me, when you talk about the fact that other women have their own rules as well. And what emerged for me as I was watching your film and you were going through these rules is that reality that, through consciously creating these rules, and sometimes we unconsciously create them, but through creating these rules and setting up these rules, more women are pushing themselves outside of the public space. So it means in a very real way that the public space is not a space that women feel that they can be a part of. And so women will retreat and be and stay in the private, which also is not necessarily guaranteed to be a safe space. I'm wondering then, how do you then deal with the reality that in as much as you create your own rules, when you go out into the world, not everyone is going to respect your rules. More likely your rules are going to be ignored. So how do you deal with that reality?
The rules that I've created are basically about me trying to protect myself. And I've had many encounters whereby I told people, or I told this other day, actually it happened this week, I told the taxi driver that, no, actually I'm not gonna get in because it's only you and this other guy and it's late. And then he told me straight up to my face that, if I wanted to hurt you, I could have hurt you right now. So, meaning that your rules are actually, some people will tell you up to straight to your face that your rules are actually ineffective in a way, and we can do whatever we want to do with you. Which is why in this conversation, I would like to rope in the men, because I feel like they are the perpetrators. They are the ones who are making it hard for us to exist.
Yeah. I mean, you're making us aware definitely here, and many of us possibly know this, that men are aware of what GBV is. It's not something that they are unable to comprehend. I'm also just going to notify colleagues that they can drop in comments and questions as we converse with Olwetu. You were mentioning, and you're still talking now, about the need to bring in men into the conversation. And in your movie, towards the end, you also bring in some of the conversations that has been happening on social media, and some men also just addressing that conversation and being in support of marginalized women, feminized bodies, if you like. To what extent do you think that social media has helped to change attitudes that men hold about GBV? Has social media even been effective in your point of view?
Honestly, in my point of view, I do feel like social media has been effective in trying to educate men about GBV, and some of them do come to play, and they actually do their part, which is what we expect them to do. Social media has a way of educating people, because now men are not only in their own spaces where they create this rape culture, where they have their own ideologies of what women are and what they are, and they are in, and the inferiority of women to them. But when we bring the dialogue to social media, we can be able to tell them that, look, you're not superior, we are all equal. And basically, the reason why women are creating these rules is not because women are overly emotional human beings. It's because you guys make it so difficult to coexist with you. Basically, you are the cause of the pandemic. So we've been trying to educate men, and I've seen a lot of responses with social media, I won't lie. A lot of men have come up, and they themselves have corrected each other on social media platforms, whereby a man would make a nasty comment about a woman, and then another man would come in and like, yo, bruh, don't do that. It's not right. And I think it's carrying on. Still a long way to go, but yeah, we're carrying on.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you are right in terms of social media creating, being a much more engaging platform where there's more conversations, and people are coming in to confront. It's quite a difficult conversation, of course, for people to be a part of. It's quite complex as well. Just a comment here I'm going to take. I see one from Barbara Kritzinger. Barbara saying, it's so powerful to show just how GBV permeates a woman's life. Thank you, Olwetu. Very courageous to show your experience, show your experience, sorry. Siskoli saying, it's lovely when young women are creating their own rules and have the confidence to do so. So quite positive comments coming in. Thank you, colleagues, for those so far. I'm wondering as well, you do mention typically, you do mention in your bio for us and how you introduce yourself to us, or prefer to be introduced as, you locate yourself as someone from Mthatha. Artists generally play on this reproduction of their socializations in their art, but sometimes they don't reproduce their socialization, in some of the other work that you've done. To what extent do you show your socialization or critique your socialization? Do you bring that into some of your work?
I do bring that into some of my work. Actually, someone once called me a very angry filmmaker. And I was like, me? Of course, I went into defense mode. I was like, I'm not angry. And then it took a lot of reflection to kind of like, actually, yeah, I do put up some angriness in my film. And that happened after the incident happened. And I was like, okay, now I know why I'm writing things that are making people think that I'm an angry person. But I do like to be a filmmaker who's conscious of her environment, who's conscious of the social ills that are happening in her society, and tries her level best to bring awareness to those social ills.
Yeah, I think, I mean, of course, your work is coming at quite a pivotal time. It's quite at a relevant time. And so it opens wounds for us in some ways. But I also think what you then center to say that this film wouldn't possibly have come about had COVID-19 not happened. And what you illustrate as you reflect on the movie in that point you make is to illustrate how, you know, policies and government is able to shift its focus on other issues and not this pandemic that is equally important, if not greater, right? And I'm wondering if you want to perhaps just comment a little bit more in terms of the movement on GBV in the country, but also Namibia recently has had its own movement in terms of engaging how the government has been slow in response mechanisms on protecting, you know, survivors and victims, if you like. Do you want to comment perhaps a little bit on that, on how the political climate and the political attitude have chosen to not be as responsive, rather, to the issues you raise in your film?
Thank you, Tao. Where do I even begin with this one? The gender movement, the GBV movement in our country, it has times, it has periods where it's active, where you can see that everybody is in it. Okay, now we are all up for it, we're all fighting it. And then later, or a week later, it just dies down. And for me, that makes me so angry, because the fear and the anxiety doesn't go down when it dies down. I still have to go and follow those rules. And it was at that point when I realized how swift the government was to respond to COVID-19. I was like, well, if these people are able to deal with a pandemic so swiftly, why haven't we been dealing with the pandemic that we've been facing for like the longest time in South Africa? And why is it that when we speak out, we have to speak out, like people have to die? I remember the time when Uyinene Nkhotyana, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, passed away. It was one of those pivotal moments in GBV movement. People were coming out, they were fighting. I was like, okay, great. Maybe we're going somewhere with this. And then it just died down. I was like, yo, now what? I go back to my reality, I go back to my rules, which are not guaranteed in a way, because I don't know if I've mentioned this in the final cut, because I've been editing the film, but I do mention that although I've created those rules, there's no guarantee that I'm gonna be safe. I might wake up today and go to the grocery store to get some groceries, or go to fetch a parcel at a post office, and I might just disappear. It's those things, they happen, and it's scary. And our government, I feel, is not doing enough. They just only jump on the wagon when the spike is too much.
Thank you for that. I'm just seeing some comments coming in here. So let's go back to you, you know, referencing how, you know, people have commented on your art, you know, calling you angry. Here's Sistoli saying that this notion of us as Black women to not be angry is nonsense, because we have to be angry about that, and that comment is often directed at trying to silence us as Black women. What would your comments be just on that comment?
I actually agree with you, Sis Toli. I've been called angry more than once in my life, and as long as those things continue happening, then I guess I'll continue being angry, because it's really a way to try and silence us. Someone asked me, okay, so you have these rules, you know what to do. Why are you still angry about it? I'm like, you being in my space actually makes me angry because you are part of the problem. You asking me those questions, you are actually being part of the problem. Why are you not trying to find a way to make the space safer for me and other women? Why are you trying to kind of like diverge the attention from me being scared, wanting protection, to me being overly dramatic and angry?
All right. I think we might have a question here from Uyandisa Jubase asking, you know, and it was so interesting because the setting of your film itself was an institution of higher learning. For some of us who are quite familiar with it. I just want to, sorry colleagues, I just want to check. Oh, Olwet is still here. Okay. So the question Yandisa is asking here, Olwetu, is as a student in an institution of higher learning, what more could be done in creating safety for women in these institutions and spaces?
To create safety in these spaces, we have to talk about rape culture. We have to continue having dialogues about rape culture, because GBV doesn't just start from a man killing a woman. It starts from the way that most men think. Most men cannot even think that it's wrong to comment on a woman's body. Most men cannot even think that it's wrong to look at a woman in a certain way. He'll just say, "No, I just looked at you. Why are you being dramatic?" And it's very, how can I put this? It's very upsetting that people from a higher learning of education would expect them to know better. But what I've realized is that they don't. Some of them really don't. They really don't get, why is it that if I buy you a drink, why are you not sleeping with me? Me buying you a drink means that you have consented to sleeping with me. Therefore, you should sleep with me. It's those ideologies and those notions that we need to kill at an institution. And it's us women having this conversation and also bringing in those men so that they can go out there in their own spaces where they have their discussions and educate each other. I think that's how we can do it. And also beef up security in higher learning of institutions. I mean, it's really not up to standard at this point.
All right, so I'm just checking. Thank you so much, Olwetu. I'm just checking for comments, questions that are coming in, if there are any. And I'm just checking with colleagues on YouTube, just as we're about to wrap up the session. Okay. I don't see any, but I'm thinking that colleagues will be engaging as we just move throughout the conversations and the next 2 days that we have. Thank you so much, Olwetu. And I think quite importantly, what you're highlighting there towards the end is that, and this we know, of course, is that an issue such as GBV is going to need all of us and various stakeholders, of course, to be part of solving the problem and to be part of the conversation as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to allow you a few minutes to do some closing comments, perhaps some lessons that you want to highlight as you are now thinking through the movie, now that it's at its final editing stages. What are some of the lessons that that you've drawn from that experience, and just your closing comments?
Thanks again. As I've said, the school project is, I was doing a film for my honors school project. I didn't know that it would get so much attention. And of course, I would like to thank everybody who was involved in organizing this film festival, because really for us young filmmakers, we crave the platforms to showcase our work, and we crave the platforms to create engagement, and to have that platform given to me, even when I wasn't, because I wasn't trying to get this film to a film festival. I was just making a schoolwork. And when Dr. Moodley called me and she told me, I was like, yeah, of course I do want to be part of something like that. And it was like my prayers were answered, basically, because when I was making the film, I wanted people to know, I wanted women to see their stories reflected in mine. And I wanted them to know that they are not alone. And I also wanted to bring in a lot of stakeholders, as you said, to show that we're living in our own pandemic. Basically, women are facing two pandemics at once, and it's really scary. And yeah, thank you everyone for organizing this whole thing. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olwetu. And just, I mean, to borrow from Barbara there, for the courage, of course, and the bravery that you've had to draw from, to create this project. And thank you for sharing it with us, and for allowing us to also just engage some of your work. Of course, as we were also looking at the movie with some of the colleagues here, we were talking about how quite intense it is, and quite how triggering it is in some cases, and definitely how we are also able to think, oh well, we have rules, we just don't call them out as rules. That a lot of us do curate how we look and how we perform in the public space, as a means of protecting ourselves, and as a means of trying to keep our bodies safe. So thank you so much for your work. Looking at the time, colleagues, the next session starts at 14:30 in my understanding. Panel discussion there with Shamila and with Uyologazi. They will be just thinking through and talking us through some of the themes and questions that are coming out of the documentary film, No Longer Whispering Truth to Power. Yandisa Jubase will be back for that session. So I think we have a bit of a longer break now, where colleagues are able to just refresh, have a bathroom stop if you need to, as we head for that big movie panel. All right, thank you so much, Olwetu, and thanks, colleagues, for the engagement so far. We will be live. Well, we're not going off live. We will be live again, back with Uyandisa at 14:30.
allegations into the former president. So as you can imagine, from a documentary maker's point of view, this was a very dramatic story to be told about, you know, a woman who had taken tough decisions, but at the same time was receiving death threats, was receiving criticisms as well as insults about the way she looked. And so all of these for me, I mean, one as a woman from a gender perspective, but just also the weight of the story that was playing out before. So I thought that this had, you know, this would make a good story in terms of showing people what an office like the public protector did, but also in quite a dramatic scenario. But personally, I was also interested in who Thuli Madonsela was as a person. And this proved to be a little bit more difficult to navigate, because as you can see, Thuli Madonsela is quite an enigmatic and private person. So I had first encountered Thuli Madonsela beyond the media in my sort of previous work that I did, which was in law and advocacy. So in around 2009, 2010, I worked as sort of a scribe for a good governance conference. And this was something that was organized by Thuli Madonsela. And she got people around the country to come every year to talk about issues like good governance and ethics. And I took notes for this conference, and I thought, here's somebody who is so passionate about what could be very dry concepts such as ethics and good governance. But it was fascinated me. And I also saw that she had always been very committed to social issues and gender issues. So I was just curious to know more, and then to bring to audiences who were interested in her, just to know more about this woman, this Black woman who, whether you agreed with her or not, was standing up to the highest echelons of power at a time when it was not that popular to do so. So I think with the film, what I wanted to do is to make an observational film, which was not really an interview-based film, but where you would just follow her in her daily life, in her routine, in the office, and where you would get a sense of this person, this public protector, both as a public protector, but also as a colleague, as a boss, as a woman, as a mother, as a controversial figure, whatever it is. And that was kind of the impetus with which I went into the film. At the same time, I didn't want to make just a film about an office that was confronting corruption, because there are also many other fault lines in our society. And in 2016, it was a particularly turbulent year. We had the Fees Must Fall protests. We had calls for greater redress. We had questions coming to the fore about the effects of an unaccountable past and how this was not being dealt with. Issues of inequality, we all know many of these issues. So I wanted the film to also, reflect on all of these issues. So yeah, I think that's some of the main impetus for making the film. And we can unpack many of these, I think, in the conversation. There's lots of specific things. Maybe I'll just end with a little anecdote about the title, Whispering Truth to Power. I think if you've seen the film, I think Thuli Madonsela speaks about how it is a form of decision-making that she has taken from the Venda tradition. It's about whispering softly and rather than imposing a way of doing things and coming to some sort of agreement together. But I thought I'd just also bring this anecdote that when I was doing research for the film, I went back to look at one of the initial interviews when Thuli Madonsela was first being chosen for public protector. So there was an interview, I think many of you probably know how it works. Parliament interviews many potential candidates. So Thuli Madonsela at the interview, she has a very soft voice, as you know, and a lot of her colleagues say it forces you to listen. So at the interview, the chair of the portfolio committee was interviewing her, said, and I didn't put this in the film because it didn't fit, but I always wanted to, but the chair said, Miss Madonsela, you have a very soft voice and a gentle demeanor. Are you sure you're going to get the confidence of the people who come to you, that they really feel that they would get help? And she replied, yes, I have a soft voice, I have a gentle demeanor, but I'm able to make decisions, firm decisions. And I just thought that was quite beautiful, because as you can see, it was borne out in the work that she went on to do. So I could go on, but what I think is maybe best for me to stop and to let everybody chime in.
Thank you so much for that input. Really, I am moved, I'm touched, and I really think we're going to have a very interesting discussion and conversation. Yolagazi, just your reflections before we continue with the conversation about your thoughts around the film and just your thought process in just making of this film about this woman.
Thank you so much, Yandisa. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Yolagazi Mfuti. The first time I was introduced to this film, I was like, okay. I was crossing fingers that I assumed that is one of those documentaries that people are bashing the former public protector. And I was so excited to actually learn the opposite, that this is a documentary that seeks to inform us of the person, Professor Thuli Madonsela. And now, when I watched the movie, the first thing that caught my eye was the quote that she did, saying that with enormous power lies enormous responsibility. And she did not only take that in terms of referring to the president, but also to herself as well. She had a huge power as a public protector, but her responsibility was to uphold the values of that particular position, regardless of who says what, right? So that's one thing I got from her. And to be honest, she did keep up to a standard, regardless of what leadership and who else decided to change along the lines. She stuck to her roles, and she stuck to her values and the values of the office. The second thing that got my was when public protector is kind of appointed, and the office is part of the chapter and institution, right? And as the country, we like, our constitution is the beautiful thing ever, but we have the offices that are there to ensure that the constitution is fully implemented. And then the public protector's office is there to do that. But now, when the office is doing its job, people are feeling a type of way. People are feeling that the public protector is attacking certain people. And I'm not certain if it was, maybe very subjective of me, but I found out that people were attacking her of who she is as a woman. What does she know? She thinks she knows everything because she's a lawyer. And how dare a Black woman attacks a Black man, right? As if things that are wrong, that are done by certain people, cannot be deemed as wrong because those people have been underprivileged or those people are vulnerable. So she had to fight many battles of establishing herself as an excellent public protector, but also being able to survive with the daily threats and daily having to dodge bullets. I'm not necessarily like physical bullets, but having to dodge bullets, having to stay safe because she had to provide leadership to her office, provide leadership to her colleagues as well. It was a very difficult journey for her. But one thing that I want to commend Shamila for doing a great job, because every day we always lamenting about the fact that women's work is always constantly erased. Women are constantly erased in history. There's no, there are no enough books in history that document the lives and the journey of women. Many people, they know of the former public protector, but if you go to media and go to listen to older generation, they might have a different story. But this film is here to ensure that the positioning and the way the former public protector is seen by society is not going to be erased. This film is going to be available for generations to come to ensure that when you are given responsibility to uphold certain values and certain work, you must do it, regardless of the person who put you into power, right? And this brings me to another thing that I also noticed there, that people can be very inconsistent depending on what is there to gain for themselves. They put you in positions of power, assuming that you're going to get there, and then you protect them. If you do your job and then they decide to be they decide not to do their jobs correctly, and then you call them out. They feel like you owe them something because they somehow gave you that particular position, whatever that means. But people, they tend to be very inconsistent, especially people in power. So it is important that as much as we get into positions of power, we stick true to ourselves and the values of the institutions that we represent. And most importantly, we do not disappoint the people who have hope in us. We do not disappoint the people who we're representing and the people who are very destitute, whose hope is only us, right? And she tackled the issue of inequalities. I like the fact that it came out hugely on the film, that she did not only focus on investigating the Nkandla issue. She also did impeccable work in terms of addressing the structural inequality issues, addressing individual projects. She's not like her term, she finished it only attacking one particular person. She focused on addressing issues that are affecting entire South African people, vulnerable people, poor people who had ongoing issues. If I'm correct, about 130,000 cases that she solved, which is a brilliant work and a very good outcome for a public protector who has been deemed as a person who was positioned to fight one particular person. So I'm very grateful for this film. It has been amazing, very eye-opening for me, and I believe that as much has been shown to more than 50 platforms across the world, it is needed, especially where young people are, especially where young women are, because we still face a dilemma of we have to prove our work and our work ethic beyond reasonable doubt. We sometimes people were even mocking Mandela, saying that, is she a woman? Does she still have time to take care of her kids and everything else? And on this film, we saw that her kids love her. Her kids have a relationship with her. She can be a mother and she can do her job as a lawyer, as a public protector. So these things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, that one day you have to be a mother, the following day you need to choose to be a lawyer. You can do these things at the same time. So I like this movie. This film it showed us a lot. Thank you so much, Shamil, and I'm hoping that throughout the discussions we're going to unearth a whole lot of things and going to have a conversation. And this is not the end, it is the beginning of a great journey. Thank you so much, Yandisa.
Thank you so much, Yolokazi. Thank you so much. I really liked that input, particularly about how the archival history of women and the erasure, and taking note of the erasure of women, particularly women who have led, women leaders, and the challenges that we've had in the past in capturing that. I also just wanted to, my mind is buzzing with so many thoughts, because I think there's so many nuances that the film sort of tackled and allowed us to really think through many themes about Thuli Madonsela as a figure, as a lawyer, and just holistically showing her term also, as Yolokazi has mentioned. I think the first question I just want to talk about, which both of you mentioned, is rather, I want to understand, the life of Advocate Thuli Madonsela is beautifully depicted in the film, right? And its complexities, as both her as a lawyer, as a public protector, as a mother, and all of these beautiful things about her being that she encompasses, right? But I wanted to understand why, Shamil, was it so important for you to sort of represent her holistically, represent her in her different facets, of her being? Because I think what came out so beautifully for me in the film when I was watching it was that, we saw her as a public figure. We saw her as a mother, we saw her as an advocate, we saw her in the many complexities in her being, but I just want to understand, why was it so important for you to sort of depict her in that manner, in making the film?
Well, no, thanks for all of those inputs. They all good questions and all good points to raise. I think precisely for reasons that both of you have already mentioned, it was very important for me to make a film about, I was drawn to making a film about this woman, this person in her totality, in all, I mean, I think she's also some aspects have not even come through. I mean, she's also a very spiritual person. And for me, for me, people at the heart of the documentaries I like to watch. And so I thought that she would be also, I mean, lots of young women and older women have said, Thuli Madonsela is a role model for us. And I thought there's so many ways that women are being depicted, and especially in public office, you usually don't get stories of strong figures because, I mean, as we know, many women in public office or in organizations, if they stand up to powerful interests, they get sidelined unless they have a very big organizational base. And I think what was important also to say about Thuli Madonsela is that her office has a 7-year, it's protected by the Constitution, as you know. So in some ways, she can speak out without that sanction of just being sidelined in a much easier manner than we have seen. So I thought here is somebody that, is in power and has a specific leadership style. But there's so many aspects to her. And as you know, most women have to juggle so many aspects of their life. And here, I mean, what's striking is Thuli Madonsela is a single mom as well. And, that's a whole story in itself, her and her, raising these children. I just think to see the totality of this single person who is so, she is at the top of her game in terms of her legal mind. At the same time, she's in this world, in this governance world, which is, as you know, all over the world, there's machismo in leadership. And when watching her at the press conferences, you saw this, at the height of when the heat was on. I'm sure many of you watched the whole saga play out between 2010 and 14. And what I really saw was somebody who was so resolute, but she would also show her woundedness, her vulnerability. There was a lot going on there. And I thought this is a much more relatable story if we see this person in her full, with the strengths, the weaknesses. And what I also think is that people, I mean, for me, it's just to be able to display your full self and to show a character in a film that displays their full total of themselves makes for a much stronger person, because what you can really see in her through seeing all these facets is an inner strength and determination. And I think for me, that's, a very important characteristics in a leader.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually just in awe, and just as we unpacking this and we talking about it so much. I think just with Yolo guys, I'd just like to sort of, Shamil just mentioned the leadership style, the very different leadership style that she had in her and how grounded she was in herself and in her way of leading, And one of the things that sort of came out, is that Madonsela said that people did not expect the level of firmness she had in her leadership style, because, I mean, there's the gentleness to her, but then there was no expectation of her firmness in her gentleness, if that makes sense. Decision making as a woman, So I'm just interested in just your thoughts about what are some of the stereotypes do you feel the film tackles about women, particularly in the workplace, women in leadership, and what can be done about tackling those particular stereotypes, that we saw particularly being tackled in this movie as well.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Yandisa. Well, the first thing that I noticed was the amount of women that was surrounding Thuli Madonsela. And there's this narrative that we as women cannot work together. We are jealous of each other. We're always conniving against each other and all those things. And I saw that the last person who stepped out of her office was a woman. Right. So there's this narrative which is very wrong. And I like the fact that she worked against that narrative, showing the world that it is possible for us to work together as women, and we're able to respect each other and be as professional as we can be in our workspaces without being conniving against each other. The second stereotype that this film tackled is the issue that when we are under pressure, we are going to break down. We are going to give up and say, no, this is too emotional for me. We give up and say, there's no one on my side, which is, of course, false. We saw that the entire country, the majority of the country, the institutions and structures that are set to protect women in this country were turning against her. But you know what she did? She stood her ground and ensured that she does her job, and she's not moved on who's against her side. So she tackled that stereotype that when no one is on our side, we tend to just crumble down and we give up on everything. She stood her ground. She did not care what other women were saying about her. She made sure that she strives and she finishes her term. And the one thing that you also have to do as women is it is important that we affirm each other. It is important that when we are in spaces where there are other women doing great work, we do not compete. We actually work together to ensure that the job is done, to ensure that there is never a gap in between. Way that we are going to say we want to always be the first and the only and the one women in positions of power. It is important that when we transcend into these positions, we ensure that we take other people into the same positions and not compete. And it is important that we believe each other's stories. Especially when it comes to gender-based violence, sometimes we run into an issue where when it hits home, when a case is reported from your own household, you tend to protect your brother, you tend to protect your husband, tend to protect your boss, because you feel like you know them better because they've treated you in a different manner. But if another woman comes up and says, so-and-so has assaulted me in this manner, you then not believe them. Believe other women, because one day we'll have to stand alone as women, and we have to get used to that. You get used to working together and being comfortable in our own spaces without feeling as if we are doing any kind of injustice to other women, and get away with this stereotype that we are always conniving against each other and we are jealous of each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yolokazi, for that. I think we'll just go into the comment section. It's buzzing, I can see. Some questions coming through and some commentary there. There's one from Usis Koliswa that says, and I think it's directed to Shamil. It says, what were the challenges you faced with this film, from funding to access and safety, knowing you were making a film on someone who was enemy number one for very powerful people? And then I think let's try and there's another one from, okay, would you like to answer that one, or should I read another one?
Okay, I'll do one at a time. Okay, that's fine. Well, thanks for all the questions. I mean, just to pick up before I start on what Yolakazi said about the women-led team, absolutely. The first thing I noticed about Thuli Madonsela in the 2010 conference that I worked for was that there were women around her, and in her public protector office, the senior management team around her were all women. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely very exciting for me. And there was definitely an ethic around these women that I noticed. Also, her colleague who I interviewed another female manager, said to me, in this business, people expect you to be very meek as a woman. And what we see is that Thuli is very firm and resolute in face of these men who come to the office and don't expect that sort of, that level of dealing with them. So it's definitely something that people were aware of. So yeah. Then thanks for the question. We were talking about, I think the question was about the challenges in terms of safety and access. Okay, so in terms of safety, I mean, I remember one incident where we couldn't film for a very long time. I think you see the jogging scene there's a jogging scene where Thuli jogs in the film. Around that time, there were there was a death threats against her, and that was around the time of state capture. So there, that we couldn't film her jogging. She couldn't go out in the morning. And Thuli Madonsela loves to jog. She wakes up very early in the morning. She hardly sleeps. She's extremely fit. It was like a battle keeping up with her. But yeah, I think it weighed on her, having these threats and not being able to live your life. So, but I mean, I never felt particularly unsafe myself making the film. We fit into the schedule when she said we could. And in terms of funding and access, as you know, being a filmmaker yourself, it's always difficult to get funding. And I think for this particular film, being a very politically sensitive topic, it had its particular difficulties, also because funders didn't know me and where I was going with the film. And also, I mean, some people who, would just, it was not a strategic time for some people who said they would fund the film, but it's not strategic for them to do it because, of the powers that be. So, I mean, it was really difficult to raise funding for the film, but somehow we managed to, and soft funders came on board, and over time we managed to make the film. And I think also getting access to Thuli Madonsela's office, that was a long and difficult process. And I think, frankly, I just got in at the right time. I think having the law background helped. Also, I think honestly, I think I'm quite a small person and people don't see me as threatening. So I managed to kind of weave my way into offices and spaces. And I think it was very difficult to get access to Thuli Madonsela. And the first thing she said to me when I met with her was, this film can't be just about me. I'm not, the public protector works as a team. It's all of us. I'm not going to see a film just about me. And I kind of had to convince her that this is a documentary. It's a character-led documentary. People are interested in you, but it's also, this is like a way of telling the story, and you have made the office into something. So there were lots of negotiations and conversations around that. So and just working with Thuli Madonsela and her office in terms of access, things change all the time. It was difficult to have, practically film anything. We were there and plans changed. She was in demand at the time. So, I mean, there were those kinds of practical difficulties. But I think all in all, it just made, I thought we would make the film over a much shorter period. It just made it over a much longer period. But I think it actually worked to the advantage of the film, because many times we would just have to sit back and observe the office, observe the ordinary people who go through it, talk to them, stand outside the office when there were protests, speak to people, get what the vibe was. And I think it really in the end helped me to get a richer experience of what was going on that would inform the film. So I hope I've answered your question. Okay, so shall we read the next question? Do you want to do the next question?
Yes. There's one from Prof. Ola that says, Shamila, one of the things I found most exciting is how you chose to make this film about Thuli Madonsela. Like Yolokazi importantly says, women's work is so often invisibilized generally, and especially when they are difficult women. But often we have a biographical film, we have biographical films, which are all good, but we don't actually see the woman's work and the difficult woman at work. Can you say something about what went into the specific choice to make the film in this particular way?
Yeah, I think it was a very clear choice. Thanks for that question. I think it was a very clear choice for me from the beginning that I wanted to make a film that observes Thuli in her normal space. And for that very reason, I feel like I didn't just want this person to be a static experience in terms of, just an interview, because we've seen so much about that with Thuli Madonsela. She's been interviewed by all the, international TV and local TV stations. So for me, it was important. And also, to be honest, I wanted to convey a slice of life of, what we would say is an empowered woman, because I mean, there are lots of films one gets to watch about, women who don't have power and they fight for power, which are totally legitimate and very important films. But personally, for me, I thought I wanted to tell a story of a woman who, as you say, is seen as a difficult woman, a controversial woman, a woman who's speaking out when she shouldn't be, just a woman who doesn't know her place. So all of that into the mix. And I really wanted to give the full total human experience by creating also some kind of an archive of this woman in this office at this time beyond the media headlines that you would receive. So it was very much I think in the conceptualizing of the film was to see a woman, this strong woman, and a strong woman, that was important to me, in action, but having to weather storms as well. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. But let me know if you have any further.
Yes. There's some questions coming through on the chat section. Again, it says, hello, Shamil. You profiled Thuli's daughter quite extensively, who makes a strong impression. What did you have in mind with this sub-theme? And can I just push through a second one? A brilliant film. I had some struggles playing it. What can insecure, immoral people hysterically of character and integrity? Her looks, her identity, the abuse she received showed how insecure she made people. That is from Barbara. And then there's another one, and then I'll allow you to respond, is one of the valuable scenes from the movie was her engagements with her children, not necessarily the motherhood aspect, but how one experiences different ideologies in and at home. Yes, that is more of a, yeah, that is a comment. And yeah, okay, so I think the one is about sorry, I'm losing the question.
Yeah, I think the first one about the mother, the inclusion of the daughter. Okay, so
Yes.
So first, just from a character point of view, I was very happy when I encountered Thuli Madonsela's daughter, Wensi, in terms of making the film, because just in terms of having characters in the film, as you can see, Thuli Madonsela is quite a composed person, and she, and that's, I think, what makes her a very strong public protector. But from a pure sort of filmmaking point of view, people are drawn to watch films which also have sort of passionate people who wear their emotions on their sleeves. So to be honest, when I met Wensi and I saw Wensi was sort of more that sort of person, I thought, oh, good, this is good for the film. But beyond that, I think Thuli Madonsela and Wensi Madonsela are extremely close, and so as well as with her son Wantu, and there's a very amazing bond between them. But I also, for me, I thought the story was very valuable the way it played out, because it spoke to sort of a general what you can maybe see as a generational approach, although I won't put it so neatly, divorce them as neatly as I'm saying, but just to be crude, Wensi, as you can see in the film, she does represent something of the fees must fall generation, who, as maybe opposed, people have written about that versus the rainbow generation, and sort of two different approaches of how patient you can be, how long you can be, what the mode of the conversation should be when speaking about how to deal with some of the ugly aspects that are continue to haunt us. And so Wensi was as you can see, at the university at the time, and there was dealing with the effects of structural inequality through this specific protest. And I just thought it would be good to have this dialogue in the film between Thuli, who was saying, let's talk about these issues and let's find a way, and Wensi's generation, who was saying, we're not, what are we going to do? It's taking too long. We're tired of speaking. So very crudely, it was, I think that both have their benefits and both have their limitations, and it's also not as neat as that. But I thought that I wanted the film also to just create dialogue, because I don't have the answers. And I thought it might just also be a good way of putting that on the table about how we, how we approach the difficulties that we have. So that was the reason for the mother-daughter story. And I was, and I wasn't sure whether it would, would resonate with people, but it seems that a lot of people picked that up and thought that was a very strong part of the film. So, so the next question is, so there was, okay, so I think there were two questions about the mother-daughter relationship.
Yes.
There was another comment. Okay, do you want to read the last two questions, or shall I?
Yes. I wanted to read the one that just came in, and then I'll read Sisxolisa's one after, just to get Yolokazi into the conversation as well. Is a question for both. This is from Prof. Kola. A question for both Yolokazi and Shamila. This film made me think really hard, and I'm delighted. I also thoroughly enjoyed the film. There were so many things that excited me aesthetically, and so many clever comments in the language of the film. What was joyful for you in watching this film the first and second times, Yolokazi? And Shamila, what was the most pleasurable aspect of making Whispering Truth to Power for you? So I think we'll start with Yolokazi with that question. And let me also just read Skoliswa's one. And then after these round of questions, we'll have closing remarks. Skolisa's question to Shamil is, how did it grow you as a filmmaker and a person, given the fact that you were dealing with a larger thank life character? And what was the most important thing that Prof. Tuli and the process, what did it teach you, basically? So yes, I think we'll start with Yolokazi in terms of what was the most pleasurable and what was the most joyful thing in watching the film for you, Yolokazi?
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Kola. Well, the one thing that I feel like I chuckled when I was watching the film, it was when there were like some people outside the offices of the public protector, and they were saying that they want the public protector to come outside and address them. She's kind of practicing what apartheid was doing to Black people and all that. I chuckled because I felt like people are misinformed and they're fighting battle that they did not know nothing about, just because people are fighting a woman. And they were making these very silly statements about what does she know, she's being used and all that. And those things made me chuckle, because at some point, people, they fight battles that they know nothing about. Just because it's a woman who's doing this job, therefore the woman is wrong, without knowing the side of the story. But nonetheless, the one thing that brought joy to me is the fact that this film did not only cover Thuli Madonsela as a lawyer, as a public protector. It covered her holistically. And there were moments where she was smiling and she was excited about her job. When she entered her office, there was an aura. I could feel that the people in the office were happy that they were there, that they were doing the job. So this gives a very positive and a good narrative about women who are seen as difficult, as Prof. Gola puts it, as women who are seen as problematic in society, that these people are not necessarily problematic. It is people's views that are problematic about these people. So this film, overall, it was very exciting for me. I'm looking forward to many more of films like this, where women are documented of their endeavors in society, of the things that they do against all odds, because this was not an easy job for the public protector, but she did her job, a very sterling job, and she did not let anyone deter her from her position. Thank you.
So, pleasurable aspects of making Whispering Truth to Power. There were several moments that stood out, and I think there were specific moments when we were going with Thuli Madonsela to film just some of the activities that she would be embarking on that day that didn't quite make it into the film. I remember one that stood out is when a whole lot of like female soldiers had it was Mother's Day, and they invited her to speak to her on Mother's Day, and it was just hearing everybody's struggles as a mother, and really hearing Thuli being so honest and open about her own struggles as a mother. So for me, those little moments of being with her, were delightful. Of course, the last week of filming, I thought this was going to be a very special time, but it was the most stressful week because it was when State Capture report was coming out, and there were interdicts against the report, and you didn't even know whether the report was going to see the light of day. And so we kind of like left the whole film in this difficult moment, whereas I always thought that at the last week we're going to have quite like a sweet time of filming and closing off the office and packing her books. And I mean, obviously I also had a lot of fun with, well, I guess pleasurable moments. One to her son, who, there's only a little bit about him in the film, but he's like any other son, so irreverent about his mum, and he took us to so many places and cracked so many jokes and told us so many stories. So that was also a lot of fun. But I think, as I said, it was in a lot of little moments with Thuli, and the way people respond to her, and the way she sort of gives everybody attention and really listens to them and remembers things about them. So it was those kinds of things that I learned from. Then Boliswa, I think you asked about what was the most important thing that Prof. Thuli and the process taught me. Interesting you asked, because I think I was one of those people who, like, I'm always questioning myself, and like I'm on the one hand this and on the one hand that, and I sometimes have a lot of doubts. And when I first met Thuli Madonsela, and I was even like explaining about this film that I wanted to do, and I was saying, but it's obviously sensitive and it's going to be about corruption, and I don't want, I was thinking all these things about representation of corruption and Africa and blackness and all those issues, and I was busy like explaining it to her, and she was just so clear. Like, she was like, listen, corruption should not happen, I know all these issues, this is what I believe. And she was just so open. Like, she never tried to, she was very clear about what she believes, and she's willing to back that up by action. And I think I throughout that process became much more confident in articulating my views and not questioning myself, because I end up questioning myself and my beliefs and try to look at all angles. So I think it's more about following my hunch and saying, this is what I believe. No one's going to put me, I'm open to dialogue, but let me not second guess myself, just because. So it was that sort of personal thing, I think, that she taught me, just from being around her and seeing somebody who really backs what she says up with action as well.
Yes, I really do think that is so many beautiful things have come out of this conversation, and just also both from you, Yolokazi, and you, Shamil. We are so grateful. I think we're just gonna do closing sentiments, closing remarks from both you, Yolokazi. What's the one thing you just want to leave us with as we wrap up the discussion? I think it's been beautiful, and I think we've taken so much out of this conversation from you, ladies. All right, Yolokazi, just closing remarks, and then we'll give it to Shamil, and then we will have wrapped up today, day one of the film festival.
Thank you so much, Shamil. One thing that I want to say, I want to commend Shamil for the great work of documenting women's stories. And the one important thing is for us to tell our own stories. There's one, I think, quote about Chinua Achebe that says, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter, until lions they have their own storytellers. It is important that we tell our own stories so we can be able to position ourselves correctly. And for generations that are going to come after us, they're able to reference and say, we had women such as Professor Thuli Madonsela were great public protectors, regardless of what the world had to say about them. They stuck to the values of their offices and their respective institutions. And also, this film showed us a whole lot of a great future ahead, that we still have a long way to go as women in terms of trying to position ourselves in our societies and trying to change the narrative on how we are seen as women. We are just seen as a physical bodies, as people who cannot produce knowledge, and people who can be dehumanized any day if people want to. But it is important that we stick to our values and stick to what matters to us the most. You know, not to be deterred by what is happening in circumstances, but we stick to what we believe in, and make sure that we support each other. And I'm grateful that it is a film about Professor Thuli Madonsela. It is done by another great woman, Shamil. It is a beautiful thing that women can be able to celebrate one another and can be able to work together and come up with incredible projects like this one. This was an amazing conference, film festival. I'm looking forward for the 2 days that are coming up, and I cannot wait for the conversations that we're going to have. Thank you so much for the organizers for pulling up such a great initiative.
And thank you. Well, I would like to say thank you to all of you. You know, filmmaking is a long process and it's difficult, and it's really heartwarming and important that this community is created, where we're focusing on a variety of films around women and having very frank and open conversations. So thank you to each and every one of you, and I really appreciate that you have chosen Whispering Truth to Power to have a conversation about. And please feel free to contact me if you want to show the film and so on. Thank you again.
All right, then, colleagues. Thank you, Yolokazi, and thank you, Shamil, and thank you to everyone who made today possible. Every panelist, everyone who was on the program. Just so beautiful, even all the way to earlier on, and just so many things. So many people who made today possible and made to day one a success. If we're starting this way, I am very much excited to see what day 2 and day 3 is going to bring for us today. With that being said, just I'd like for Wendy to maybe just put up tomorrow's program so that people can see. So Wendy or Nomta, yes, Wendy, to just put up the program for tomorrow, so that we can see and know what is coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow we start again, colleagues, at 12 o'clock. The films have been opened for people to stream. So the links have been shared on emails. Do contact Nomta if there are any problems with that, or Spokazi, or any one of us, really. And we just want to say we start at 12. If you're having any difficulties to log in, please do let us know so that we can sort of fix those technical errors. We start at 12 and we end at about 25 past 2 or half past 2 tomorrow. And yeah, so I'd also just like to say to colleagues, please do feel free to share with people in your networks that there's a film festival that is happening and it's exciting, and we just hope that more and more people can be a part of what we're trying to do here, as particularly as filmmakers and gender scholars and all that we are, and as feminists, you know. So yeah, I think there is no other announcement. If there's nothing else, colleagues, there is someone who's asking that the links to be shared. Okay, we have noted Robin, who's asking for maybe just share your email address, Robin, so that we can put you on the email list so that you are a part and do not miss. Yes, there's the email address. You'll get the film links hopefully after today. Anyway, colleagues, that is it from me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for just being great and cooperating. I've really had fun facilitating today's day one. And tomorrow, Dr. Hlengiwe is going to be facilitating and taking us through tomorrow's program. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.